Hi, and welcome to the 95th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the original creator of TiddlyWiki, and today I'm joined on left to right, from left to right on my screen, by Eric. Eric, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself, say where you're from, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki? Not something that's easily summarized, I know.
Well, let's see. I'm Eric Schulman. I'm from Silicon Valley, the heart of the internet. And I've been working with TiddlyWiki since, well, shortly after its inception in 2005. And I'm the developer of Tiddly Tools, which is a plugin repository for TiddlyWiki Classic. I'm the author of Inside TiddlyWiki, the missing manuals, which are still missing, but I'm developing them, so they're getting there. Um, I'm the administrator of the TiddlyWiki Google Groups, and a professional TiddlyWiki consultant for hire.
Indeed. Great that you could join us. Glad you were here, Eric. Jed, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jed. I used to live in the US, now I live in Paris. I use TiddlyWiki for a lot of things. I make a lot of things. Mainly right now I am using it to keep notes for my thesis work, and I am using it to automatically generate code for database interactions for a web design job I have right now. And yeah, I make stuff. So.
Indeed. Great that you could join us, Jed. Glad you're here. And finally, last but not least, Tobias. Hello, welcome. Would you like to say hello to everybody and introduce yourself in the usual way?
Hello, this is Tobias from Leipzig, Germany. I've also been using TiddlyWiki for quite a few years now. I'm not even sure when it started, maybe 2007 or so. Been doing lots of stuff for TiddlyWiki Classic, including like setups for tiddlywiki.org, like a community-driven portal to document things around TiddlyWiki Classic, and plugin collections. And recently, I've been doing a lot of plugin development, starting to do that for TiddlyWiki 5, and quite enjoying the process. So, yep.
Brilliant. Glad you could join us. Well, I'm very lucky because all three of you are right in the core of the TiddlyWiki community and responsible for half of the amazing things that are out there. Today we'll do what we kind of usually do, which is hand over to people who are working with TiddlyWiki and get some insight into their latest developments. And today we're going to kick off with Jed because it was last week, gosh, I'm not used to having regular hangouts, but last week Jed did a demo where the demo gods were sufficiently angry that they were throwing some lightning bolts around, and Jed is now confident that everything works, so therefore I'm going to hand over to Jed. Looking forward to this very much, by the way, and glad you're here to show it to us. But are you ready, Jed?
Sure, why not? And confident that everything works might be a bit of an overstatement. My internet connection won't die immediately, and hopefully this won't crash immediately. So anyway, for those of you who do not have background, I've been working on a plugin to integrate the Snap.js library into TiddlyWiki. I have been having, I think, a lot of success. And it works out well. Snap.js is an SVG library, which is scalable vector graphics, I believe. But they're lightweight, quick graphics that work inside the browser well, so that's why I'm using them specifically. And the Snap.js library is a quick, simple library that seems to be working quite well. So,
so now, Jed, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I just confused myself. When I Googled Snap.js, I found something else, and I thought that the library you're using is called Snap SVG. Is that correct?
That's actually quite possible.
Yes, because Snap.js, hilariously, and I was just about to post a link to it, but it's a kind of old school jQuery kind of horizontal dragger thing.
Oh.
Not a terrible thing at all. Very nice thing. It looks great, but working with. And gosh, snap.js has 5,500 stars on GitHub, so it's a profoundly popular thing.
Okay, then yeah, I guess snap.svg, which is the homepage. That's what I'm talking about, in case anybody was confused. Anyway, let's see, where was I? Yes, so there are two things that that work with this. It is at its core a well, it's going to be packaged as a plugin, but it's a widget, a Snap widget, which you can put into a tiddler, and that is the just Snap widget. You give it a surface name, and you can give it an animation type, but I don't think that is a straightforward thing at the moment yet. So you can just make it, you can have things on it, they're draggable. Okay, anyway, there's quick background. The things that you can do with it for static images are you can add like normal SVG things, which are circle, ellipse, rectangle, line, polygon, or polyline, however you want to say it. And let's see if this actually works this time. Oh, come on, you're gonna work. Wait, image one. Okay, you know what? I may have lied. Give me just a moment, please. I can show off the result of it at the very least. Okay, we're gonna wait. No, new point. No, yeah, okay, there we go. There we go. So to make a polygon, which is the more useful thing, I suppose, you can just. Let's start over with that so that I can give background. I'm sorry, I am. Anyway, so here is a surface for the SVG things. You can give it a height and a width, and you can set it to animate or not as you want. Right now I'm going to ignore that. And then I added tabs to the page toolbar. That one of them shows you all the contents of all of the things made using this plugin. Another one shows you all of the tools that I've made so far. And be warned that they are not documented well, they are not made well, and they are not complete. So, yeah, I'm working on it.
Yes.
So
pretty much for the same things that you could say about TiddlyWiki itself, I was going to say.
Oh, okay. I suppose there is that, probably, yes. Okay. Now, so the most basic thing that you can do is under SVG Tools, there's an Add Element tab where you can select which sort of element you want, and then that changes the little options below it. So you can give it a name. You can set it to be draggable or not, which this is draggable. And when you do drag it, actually, one of the first things that I made work on here is that it updates its location in the wiki itself. So the movement is persistent in that location is saved in the wiki and can be used for other wiki operations. So,
Jed,
anyway.
sorry to interrupt again. Does that mean that on every mouse move, you're saving a change to the store and running a refresh cycle in order for the moved element to be visible in its new location?
Yes, it updates the store. It does not refresh this any more than the SVG does.
Okay, so it relies on the fact that you've just updated it by moving it, and it just makes sure the store is up to date with what's happened on the screen.
Yes, it does not refresh all of this.
Yeah, but if there was a refresh in the middle of the drag, by virtue of that mechanism, it would actually refresh the shape in the right position.
Yes, I have had absolutely no trouble with that, which I was very surprised with. So, anyway, so you can set the different things: stroke color, opacity, stroke color, stroke width, and then you just hit add circle, and there it is, and you can drag it around, and it's a circle. And the other ones are exactly the same. Hopefully, the things that you give a rectangle, position, height, width, and color are straightforward enough. For the polygon, which is, I think, the only one that's going to require any sort of explanation, since, like I said, this is not put together all that well yet. You click on New Point, and then you can click anywhere on your surface. You have to, oh, something that I should have said first. You have to select which surface you are using. And to make a surface, you use the widget, snap widget. And now I have to look at what I wrote to make it actually work. Oh no, that's not there. It's here. Okay, surface. Snap widget, and it takes an argument, which is the name of the tiddler that it is going to store some basic information about the surface on. And of course, if you don't define that tiddler first, then it's going to break, isn't it? So, hooray! First error that I have run into in the middle of my demonstration. Okay, that should fix it. Right? Nope. And now it's broken the whole thing. Okay. Restarting that. Anyway, you need to do that. If you look at the demo, you can see how it is in the demo, and like I said, none of it is actually put together well enough yet to make this clean. Anyway, so you choose the correct surface that you want. Choose the correct surface that you want, which is SVG image 2 at the moment. And then that is because if you click on the wrong one and you didn't select that, it would throw all sorts of errors and things would die. But anyway, so you click New Point, you click on there, you add New Point, you click New Point again, and you click somewhere and you can add New Point. And it shows you what you have as you were building it. And then if you want to move a point, you can click on Edit next to that point. It will change that point number to green, and then you can move around. And then hit Update, or you can just move points. And then, same thing, you can give it some fill color and all of those things. Give it a name, and add it, and it's just the same as the other ones. So as far as static images go, or not animated images go, that covers pretty much anything that you could do with what I have, and in a very, very basic sense, covers everything that, vector graphics without zooming, I guess, which is a very big part of it. But for like authoring, that covers a lot of stuff. Not all that useful, but it is there. Then the part that I've actually been working on much, much more than that is animation, which here's my little thing that I have been making as I work on it. And it's just, I don't know how smooth that looks in the video, but if you go to the demo site, which is there, then you can see. And so it can chain animations together. It can animate groups of elements as single units. And the newest thing that I have made is that if I click on this, then it triggers another animation. So with all of this, there are all of the same restrictions as before, where it's not put together well, no documentation, all of that. But it would be possible to make things like menus and things like that that interact with the rest of the wiki. Just need to get around to making it and putting it into a form that is usable by somebody who didn't just make it. But yeah, so if you click on that there, yeah, and that is, the star is invisible right here, but that happens asynchronously with the rest of it, which I thought was kind of neat and took absolutely no extra work on my part because of how it's put together. Like how the library is put together, that's not something I can take credit for. So I can go into how the animation works, but I think that might be less useful than...
I think something I'd like to be interested. I'd be interested to hear you talk about, Jed, is where you might where you're going with this. I mean, is it going to become more like a kind of conventional graphics editor with more draggy droppy stuff, or are you more drawn to there's another side of it, which is the sort of TiddlyWiki-esque side of building complex things up from smaller elements and transclusion and so on. I'm curious where you're finding your interest taking you.
Well, at the moment, a combination of both, but more on the TiddlyWiki side of building things up from smaller objects. Like the way that all of this works is like there are elements which are individual SVG objects that you create using the thing I just showed, and this is just a very simple SVG surface that shows what you're looking at. So you can move it around using the controls here, and that sets its location in the main thing. So if we take what sun's circle, that's the center of the sun, give the surface some space, and then we can, it's not moving, why is it moving? Yeah. You can change the colors here and things like that. And so this here, everything is just a template. The tiddler itself is just the definition for the circle, and then it gets moved down here because I moved it and all of that. Now if I play the animation, yes, changes the centers circling around. But so everything is defined like that. And actually, after the previous hangout, I was talking to I'm terrible with names. Matthias a bit on how this works, and he had brought up that right now the way that tiddlers is talked about are as this square or rectangular thing here with the little shadow and the buttons and all of that. But what the tiddler actually is some little collection of data. So saying that this little star here is a tiddler is a completely valid way of viewing the system. How useful it is with what we have set up right now, I am not certain, but that is the direction he would like to move in, and I think that's a good idea. So,
if I could jump in, I said this reminds me a bit of, and I always come back to this. It reminds me of something I did back for Classic. There was a thing I called the paste up plugin, and what it did was it extended the tiddler transclusion mechanism so that you could specify the position of a transclusion as an absolute relative. So you could move it around and drag it and place it relative to its position in the transclusion flow. And so each graphical element was a separate tiddler with its own position and size and shape. And then I had a tool that lets you build up on a sort of a workspace by basically doing transclusions and positioning them.
Yeah,
and building up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much exactly what he was, or one implementation of what he was talking about, where you really go with the idea that a tiddler is a information that you're representing in some way, not just this square thing here. Anyway, so there are the elements like that, and those are the basic building blocks. And then there are groups which are defined as a collection of elements that can be manipulated as a single thing.
And behind the scenes, how's that group represented?
The group right now is represented by tags. All of the information, it is the image that it appears on is given, and then if the group is draggable, can be set. The opacity of the group can be set as a whole thing, and then the group is given a name, it is given a type, and then the tags are the individual elements which are in the group. And then the other information about if that group has been dragged and where it's been dragged to, and rotation and zooming are all here. But it is like the minimum amount of information that I could do and make it work. That's been the goal for every piece of this, so that it is it works well, or works as well as I can make it. So if we go here, and this is the sun, make it draggable, then you can, oh wait, no, stop it, it needs to refresh. And then you can drag the sun, kind of. Or it's going to break. Yeah, it's one of the bugs where if you make something draggable, sometimes the initial positioning number is broken and is given as nan, which means that everything after that is broken, and there are problems. But I'm working on it. Anyway, so there are groups, and then there are animations where each little animated thing here, like this moving and that's spinning around, and the boat moving down, each one of the water things moving independently, and then all of them together, and then this zooming in, are all defined individually as animations. And this is made in a similar way. Right here, this is just a view template for it, but it's tagged as an animation. It has a name. The callback part means that it is triggered by the ending, by another animation ending, so they can be chained together. That is one of the many things that I need to actually write out in a way that makes sense to people who are not familiar with how these things work. And then you give it a duration. The effect part is actually part of the JavaScript library. And I'm not certain what all of them do, but you can play with them and see what it goes. Then enabled, it just means that it will actually run. Finished is so that the animations, there were problems with the refresh, like Jeremy had asked earlier about refreshing, like how that worked. And to make the animations work, I actually changed a lot of how the widget refreshes. Like there are a lot of restrictions on when it is allowed to refresh if you're doing an animation with it. And this just says that if the animation is finished, if that's true, then it skips the animation and moves everything to the final position. Then the image that it's on, and then the next thing is the function that, or the animation that starts after this one is finished, and then that one also needs to have the callback set to true. And then the object is being animated, the type of that object, and the actual parameters of the animation, rotation and scaling and whatnot. And then there are actions, which are even worse, like they have an even worse definition for them than everything else. But everything that happens is an action. So like to start the animation, that gets an action, and to like the clicking on the star, that's an action. That's a click action, which I have separate here because for planning. But and then you have actions are defined, and then you're going to have this should be like a interaction or something like that, so that you can click on it and it will trigger one of these actions. Or there's a set of actions that when you hit play animation, all of them start, which are all of these animations start, and those are triggered by saying make these actions happen. And when I get that set up, it should be, conceptually it is relatively straightforward. It's just the implementation of it is not. And then click actions are another part that is quite new, where like if you click on the boat, that animation starts all by itself, and if you click on the sun, then that animation starts by itself. And I think water. Nope. Okay. Yeah, and those are the only ones that are there because I'm still making all of that work. But so yes, everything is made up of those smaller pieces. So in that way, I'm trying to go with the TiddlyWiki ideas of you make the little bits and you mix and match them to show what you have. And yeah, and then there are the bar chart examples, which I had shown before. This one is now broken, but let's see, there was another thing. What was it? Timeline, there we go. And then, oh, one of those things. I made a very, very simple timeline, if it is not going to work at all. Okay, never mind. There had been a very simple timeline. Yeah, like I said, everything's still in, still working on it. But
a slightly frivolous, I mean, not a frivolous suggestion, but a slightly unhelpful suggestion, possibly. But two of the things that you've worked on recently have been combined to brilliant effect by other people, which is the idea of a resume that includes infographics that, in our case, could be driven by the data that they have entered to describe themselves. And I'll just screen sharing. It's something that so this is the result of Googling resume infographic, and the kinds of things that I quite liked was stuff like that, which is kind of a timeline. And I'm not sure what the graph parts are, but and this one, quite a cool kind of tube line representation. But anyway, there's some of the simpler ones, he says, trying to choose a simpler one. Yeah, I think the timeline particularly could be quite fun, you know, if you were looking for a, Jed, if you're looking for, if you got bored with palm trees and we're looking for another example. So.
Yes, I've actually been looking at that a bit more because Felicity is trying to, or is actively looking for work now, and despite me having the small bits of work that I've had, I should be actively looking for work. So I do have a
an incentive, yes.
Yeah.
And TiddlyWiki remains an excellent displacement mechanism.
Oh yes, and also not related to any of this really, but the reason that I have the job that I currently have with the web design stuff is because I learned how to use PHP to make it interact with TiddlyWiki. So.
Yes, well, PHP remains a favorite of a lot of people.
So.
Any questions before we move on? Any questions or thoughts for Jed from anybody else?
Jed, that was great. This is Steve at SUNY. And I'll definitely sort of share that with some students who may be interested in animation. I just never thought of using TiddlyWiki as an animator, and that's just wonderful. Thanks.
Great. I mean, and it's it's what Jed's working on here. I think TiddlyWiki into a lot of interesting territories. You know, you could imagine a very active PowerPoint-like tool, a presentation tool with built-in dynamic visualizations and animations and so on. Really lovely. Jed, so thank you. I was going to suggest next that we turn to Tobias, because I think that both Steve and Eric have, I think, shown stuff more recently than Tobias, so it might be quite fun to see what you've been up to. I think it's actually also a few weeks since you've been on a Hangout, so yeah. Welcome back. Mm-hmm. But you seem to have still been very busy on GitHub and the group in the meantime.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, I'll just start a screen share. You should be seeing a window that says welcome and shows a lot of plugins.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay. Good. So today I added like 3 more of them, or like let me introduce you some that I have been maybe developing in the last 2 weeks. So let's perhaps start with setVars. This is like a plugin that is useful for setting variables in a more flexible manner than maybe the set and vars widgets allow. So it's rather straightforward how it works. You define a number of attributes to the setVars widget that are prefixed with underscore, and then later on you can use these attributes in variable declarations. So the variable var1 is going to be composed of whatever attribute 1 is. And then this is this funny syntax to add like literal strings to it. Or let me maybe move to the examples, then we also see the output. So let's say here we have a setVars that is just outputting some string that is where no further attribute is being evaluated, right? So here's just the simplest example that says, okay, take whatever is in the attribute bar and make foo out of it, right? So we're in the titular setVars. So the variable foo is going to be set to the title being setVars, and this is the output of it. So here we got a much more complex example where you have like a variable foo that is like concatenated of these two. So here we're reading the title again, and there just a simple string that doesn't make much sense. I could have put it in these backslash in the backslash syntax, but just to demonstrate that this is how it works. So this is going to be concatenated to this down here by replacing the two attributes in the variable declaration. So this provides for quite some flexibility. I also added not just an ability to retrieve like standard text references or variables as we can do with attributes, but also we can stuff in filters. And to tell setVars to evaluate an attribute as a filter, you just wrap the thing in square brackets. So here we're using the eval, which not widget, the eval filter, which is a filter that I also created that uses math.js to evaluate mathematical expressions. So this one would just do, okay, add 1 to the title I'm given the title that I'm given is 1, so the result's going to be 2. And this number 2 is going to be the result that is stored into the variable foo, which I am telling to evaluate whatever is in this attribute bar as a filter. So, and now I can go ahead and mix and mingle all the different bits and pieces together that I want and create quite flexible variables from it, all the way up to something that very much looks like a macro or like, well, wiki text, right? So this, I mean, this can literally be, it's going to be transcluded in the end if I use it like that. So, for example, do I have an example somewhere? I could just, here's a macro. What's the macro doing? Maybe it's too complex, maybe not. Let's see. So this is a macro that's supposed to route me somewhere, like to this Tiddler text reference, which I don't have, and the macro is figuring out, okay, I don't have it in my wiki, so I'm going to move to what's defined here. Yeah, I'm gonna make it a link to TiddlyWiki.com and a Tiddler by that name over there. So I'm checking, do I have this Tiddler using this filter, and actually using the macro parameter in it, right? That I'm giving to this route macro. So I'm checking, does it exist? Do I have a text reference Tiddler? No, I don't. So I'm going down here. If I go to the actual link variable that is creating this output, as we see here, it asks, okay, do I have a Tiddler? If I do have a Tiddler, okay, then just make an internal link. So this is like the Wikitext syntax for the internal link wrapped in these literal things, right? Whatever is enclosed in these literals is going to be taken as is, and everything in between is going to be this attribute from up here. So here I have the attribute title, which simply just checks, okay, am I given this pretty title as well as a parameter, right, here? So if I do have a pretty title, then of course I take a pretty title, and if I don't have a pretty title, then I use the title I'm given. And as you can see, this setVars thing, I added something that I call conditionals, so you can do basic like if then else statements with it, which is also quite useful, I find, because it avoids from having to use reveals just to make different sort of conditionals. Yeah. So I can just initialize my variable correctly, and then I am flexibly assigning different values to it depending on how filters evaluate. So the end result of all this is, okay, down here I get a link depending on if I had given a pretty title or if a Tiddler existed, and now that it doesn't exist, I just click on it and it will direct me to TiddlyWiki.com. So that would be setVars, I think. I don't know, do you have any questions on that or feedback maybe? I don't know. there's quite a lot of things you can do with it.
I'll let other people go first.
I was just going to say it looks really useful, and I have not had a chance to play with it yet, but I have been doing far too many like if-then-else sort of statements using reveals, and it's I'm looking forward to this a lot.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I think it's very interesting to bias. So you're for a start, I think this is absolutely a great thing to be exploring in a plugin. You know, to some of our earlier discussions, this is you're picking up territory where there's really obvious holes in TiddlyWiki and where there's no obvious extended. And I'm thinking there about things like your fall through that's on screen there now for the title. And yet, I think that we've seen that logically is a requirement that crops up all the time. It's a very curious mixture of substitution, string substitution, and I guess a parsed expression. You must have some kind of parser in there for parsing things like
I wrote it myself actually. It's based on regular expressions, so yeah, slicing and dicing.
That's one of the things that is really important when I say it's really good that it's a plugin, is the really obvious point, is that for a plugin there are no rules. Toolskin is make it work, you know. And I think that's much more liberating, because it's actually, in terms of changes to TiddlyWiki, some of the ones I'm really interested in, you know, are these quite tricky ones to make, to add deep new functionality that's lacking, you know, and it makes it a lot easier when these experiments are being run. As ever, when I think about it as a kind of core component, I'm really interested in, you know, is this mechanism something that can be generalized? Is it something that's potentially more general purpose than the existing macro string substitution mechanism? Something I mentioned before is that the string substitution mechanism in macros is pretty slow, particularly if you're parsing, you know, wikifying the macro. And I think here this could be more performant. So yeah, very interesting. Thanks for sharing.
One thing that's obvious is we're definitely reducing the number of widget instances that we need to do things, right? Because this is like replacing a whole host of other widgets that are essentially not needed using this. So
yes, and it's a very Jeremy sort of thing, in that in order to do that, in order to cover so much ground, you've introduced one new technique, I think, and one completely new mechanism, you know, which is this new expression format. And that's to be expected. When we're talking about deep features, there will be new mechanisms to be added. So it's really interesting to see you synthesizing a mechanism. And yeah, interesting.
Let me just move up here to the conditional thing again. There are some examples here where just so you see what it does. So it's essentially just asked, okay, do I have this attribute defined? No. Does the attribute that I have defined there have a value or not? If it does, then I take this. If it doesn't, I take that. Otherwise, I take that, right? So I can, the only way to check in our macro-based or Wikitext ways is, do I have anything or don't I, right? I'm not checking value against value. If I want to do that, then I use something like this eval filter or Math.js to do the computation for me. So, and this is also quite straightforward. You just define a condition, and the condition would essentially mean, do I have any string? Yes or no. If I have a string, then take this. And if I want to have an else value, then I just combine these two together, and then I have an if then else. So
yeah, it's a really good example of how composable the new mechanism is.
Yeah. So another thing that I made is called make. And it allows to create, I just jumped to the examples, tiddlers, oh no, not tiddlers, titles, unique titles. So if I'm not giving it anything in the if it is given input titles, then it's operating on those. If I'm not giving it any input titles, it's operating in a, like, I don't know, in a different mode, I'd say. I can, oh, I'm sorry, too much scrolling. I could say, okay, maybe I'll scroll actually down to the example where I'm creating like 3 different titles. So I'm actually also allowing to evaluate variables in here, and I have placeholders that are going to be replaced. So the count would be the current iteration. Here I'm saying, okay, create 3 titles based on the current titler and use the count in it to. This is like the template by which the title is being constructed.
I see.
So.
Yes, very nice.
So, and this allows again for quite a few options. Here you have like my beloved ID mechanism. I finally found a place to put it. This says, okay, make me a UUID, or this says, give me a random string that's going to be alphanumeric with lower and uppercase. So, of course, if I do this, then you see, oh, we're going to be updating all this stuff. But since I just created ZVARs, I can tell you that this is not necessarily a concern. Am I seeing this somewhere? Not exactly sure. But if I use it together with ZVARs, then I can essentially prevent it from doing that. Do I have an example here? If not, I should be putting one in. Okay. I thought so. Okay, but anyhow, if I was to use ZVARs to evaluate this expression and to create a variable from it, then these guys wouldn't be changing anymore, because ZVARs is only evaluating this filter once when the widget is created. It's not constantly recalculating if the filter has different output now. Because if I want to do that, then I can use the set widget. That is doing that already. But the other case, we don't have that yet. So I find it pretty useful to constrain it to doing this just once. For example, if I go to, let me do it just quickly. Here I have this little thing, what did I call it? Tagline. Right now, if I do a click, it is pretty much updating every single time, right? But if I was going to use make now and the ZVARs widget, I can tell it to just do that whenever this tiddler is actually being opened anew. So rather than with every single click. So can I go back here? So, here. I mentioned it here, but I didn't actually show an example how the refreshing can be avoided. So yeah, essentially this make thing, again, it's there to construct different kinds of. I can also create field names if I want to, so it's not only restricted to titles. I can say, okay, this is my titler, and give me a new field name for it that this titler doesn't have. So if I had like a mechanism that wanted to number through field 1 to whatever the number is that I want, I can use this mechanism to always create a new field name for me. Or add prefixes and suffixes, all kinds of things using this template mechanism. Another thing that this introduces also, like where did I use it? In the eval widget filter, is this thing where I'm separating options in the operand. You see, this operand is actually kind of 2 bits. The first bit is this here. This is the template that I'm going to use. So it's the count and then the maximum that I'm telling it. And then I split that, and the next option that I'm reading from this operand is the max option. So this is like a mechanism to allow to define a range of options to one single filter operand rather than try to, like, using the suffix is a bit limited, I find.
Yeah.
So this is one way to extend on that. So you can join as many options as are making sense in this way. So I could say separator is this and maximum is that, and then maybe I think I have like an example that's using all of them down here. So so you have like all this stuff that is being generated to create this result. So and it's
Awesome.
all pushed to this make filter.
Tobias, so quick word about your workflow. You're operating on Git and with the Node.js edition all the time, are you these days?
Yes. Maybe I'll just end screen sharing with this browser, and where am I going to click now? Screen share? No. Here. So let's make it the window. Where's the window? There's the window. Okay, so what did I do? I put all my repositories, if I wish, on GitHub into one folder, right? And each and every single plugin has its own.
JBBA ones there.
Yeah, these are all these. If I go to, oh, okay, that was not the right good window. Let's see. I'm going to GitHub, right? And then I'll check out my repositories. Where I'm going to see them all there. So repositories, right? All my repositories that are TiddlyWiki plugins are called TW5 dash and then the name, right? And all of these are essentially here in this folder. And every single
you drop the TW5.
Every single plugin is essentially a repository. So if I maybe take make, I just created that. So I have an edition for it that has the documentation here, make. And this actually, I started yesterday, does have a test edition, so I can run tests now that check if everything is still working as it's supposed to be.
Great.
Finally.
What are you using for the test?
Yeah, so I'm essentially using the same test mechanism that you do on TiddlyWiki.com,
right?
But for every single plugin separately.
Great.
So then, of course, there's this plugins folder that will, for every single repository, just hold the one plugin that it has. And there's a source folder which is a method that I've learned from Felix, which is essentially allowing me to use all this stuff that are my is my commented source code, right? You have a lot of pros in here explaining what all this does, which I didn't do earlier, but I'm glad that I started doing this because sometimes it's quite hard to just by reading the code understand what was I doing there. So, but in the end, I'm going to click on this batch file, which is running this gulp file, which is eventually going to move this stuff into a destination folder in my repository and do some uglification, like minification. So that eventually all my comments don't end up in the plugin, because I think if somebody wants to read the code, it's available, it's easily accessible, it's linked in every plugin in the plugin information, so you can find it. It doesn't have to be shipped with it, I think. And another edition that I have is this plugins edition, which is eventually, if I just click on the TiddlyWiki info, then you see, okay, this is including all the different wikis for each and every plugin. And in the end, what I get is TW5 plugins, which is this wiki that has essentially aggregated all the different plugin documentation wikis. So when I click on dict, then these tiddlers that you see here that are put into this tab or maybe accessible here. These are actually all from the dict repository. And through inclusion, they end up in this TW5 wiki that has all of them listed in a way so as to show them combined, or maybe also later on, like show solutions where I combine different plugins together, right? So,
did you using Gulp? I can see you're using it to do your minifying. What else is Gulp buying you?
Right now, it's really just doing the minification for me. But I know, or I think I know, that it could also be used to watch for changes and then trigger commands based on that. So maybe I want to restart the server, or I want to build my, no, not there. I want to build my plugin whenever something in the source folder changes, right? So I think these things are also possible with Gulp, but I haven't gotten to learn how that's done. But that's really useful.
I do a lot of Gulp type things. I tend to do them in pure JavaScript because my needs aren't very extensive at the moment, but recognize there's a nice ecosystem around Gulp. Just to pick up about minification for a second, what's your view though about the impact of minification on anybody who's using developer tools to debug things?
For me, it doesn't matter at all, because I'm not even testing in the browser anymore. Because my approach is going to be.
I meant other people.
Yeah, I mean, in the browser.
For why TiddlyWiki itself isn't minified by default is that if you ever need to trace through the code, it means that you can just use the ordinary version to see what's going on, rather than.
If you really had like such a deep bug or issue that you need to actually debug the JavaScript, the underlying JavaScript, you could always just go to the repository, grab the actual source code from the source folder, stuff it into your wiki, and then see what's going on, if you want that.
But that's quite I mean, I think for a start, the situation is different between the core and plugins, because with the core, it's not so much people want to debug the core, but say if you're debugging your own code and it calls add tiddler, it's quite useful to be able to see what's going on in add tiddler, and it's only a few lines of code.
To be honest,
historically, that's been my rationale for the core.
To be honest, I haven't been, the only way I've been really doing debugging in the browser is by writing debug statements in my code. So, so maybe that's not the most efficient way. I can see that that's possible.
I do very well. I mean, I used, to be clear, I use developer tools in the browser, but under Node.js, I only use developer tools when I really have to. I get by with console.log almost all of the time as well. This minification has been it's been something I've been thinking about again recently, though, because as I mentioned on last week's Hangout, I'm doing some work on Amazon, integrating TiddlyWiki with Amazon, so that a little plugin that basically exposes the useful Amazon web services to TiddlyWiki. And one of the consequences of Amazon that Nathan mentioned a couple of weeks ago was that it's expensive. So Amazon is characterized by usage charges that at my level are pennies a month, as they say, but do scale up can scale up quite alarmingly if you have a lot of volume. And that I'm beginning to see now that, therefore, although some of the things I want to do with Amazon are very straightforward and costs aren't an issue, that to use the platform effectively means thinking about different types of efficiency than normal. So particularly Amazon charges you for data transfers in and out of their data centers. And so one of the things that is an issue, therefore, is our unminimized code. So previously, another consideration I've regularly raised is that most web servers, including the web server that TiddlyWiki.com is served from, do gzip compression. And gzip compression gives you almost the same, over the whole of the TiddlyWiki index.html file, gives you almost as good compression as minification. Obviously, it affects the content as well. So I think overall the savings are roughly comparable, which is really great because we don't have to do anything to get gzip compression. But of course, the problem is that gzip compression does not happen when you're transferring data into or out of Amazon. So in the part of the Amazon plugin is a new template that builds a new Amazon.js, so to speak, which is a build of TiddlyWiki that runs as an Amazon Lambda task. And that's built the same way that the normal TiddlyWiki HTML file is built, by rendering a template. But that template essentially pulls together all of the core components in a slightly different configuration than normal. And it would be therefore very easy to switch on minification for it. And in the case of Lambda, you can't debug in the cloud, so minification makes perfect sense. What I intend, therefore, to do when I get to the point where that is really a concern, and it's not yet, as I say, because my Amazon bills are 5 cents a month, but then my plan would be to add Uglify, which I see is what you're using there, as an optional plugin. That would be included in the tw5.com repo to do the minification as it writes. There are some issues, which is basically around handling plugins that but that's the plan. So and the reason I mentioned it, Tobias, is that if you do find that all that Gulp is giving you is the minification, then you may want to explore doing what I described. I mean, a very early version of TiddlyWiki in 2012 did do minification with Uglify. Terribly straightforward, because ultimately minification is take a block of text and output a block of text. So it makes a great JavaScript macro. Okay. Tobias, any questions or thoughts from anybody else? And then I was going to suggest that we switch over to Eric. But first, any other questions or thoughts for Tobias? Or indeed, sorry, is there anything, Tobias, that you're still desperate to show us? Plus, by the way, Jed, you're still screen sharing. If you know that.
I mean, I don't know. There's more stuff, but it's not like I have to make a whole hangout out of it.
Well, I think one of the things that I was going to talk about was how there's now rather an extensive list of plugins on your site. You're following the same path as many people before you, I guess, where I seem to remember a time, when you weren't writing plugins, were less hands-on with JavaScript, I think. And now here you are rapidly entering the same problem that Eric has of having written more code as TiddlyWiki plugins than is contained in TiddlyWiki itself.
Well, maybe. I don't know. Probably
you'll be getting that. Just before I switch over to Eric, I was just going to mention in passing, whilst I just brought up the Amazon work that I did, 2 byproducts of that work, two byproducts, is that I've added 2 new plugins to the core that are plugins that package 2 off-the-JavaScript libraries. One is the async.js library, which is a library for doing asynchronous programming, and when you're doing the kind of more complex asynchronous stuff that comes up when you're syncing, say, it's quite useful to have async. And the other one is something called JSZip. So we found this, I think we may even have talked about it quite a few months ago. It's a pure JavaScript library that can read and write zip files. And I needed it because when you upload a new Lambda function to Amazon, you have to pack it as a zip file. So for the Amazon work, I've made an absolutely brain dead, what's the word, integration with JSZip, where basically the Amazon equivalent of the render tiddler command. So this is a render tiddler command that instead of saving the results, the file system pushes it to S3, has an additional parameter now to optionally zip the file at the time that it uploads it. So what I'm trying to say is integrated JSZip, using it for something very specific and frankly not very useful in the middle of the Amazon work. But the plan is to return to it because it does let us do some incredibly interesting things in the browser. In particular, Dave Gifford and others have been exploring exporting static tiddlers from within the browser. And the usability of that is not bad at the moment to export a single tiddler or a sequence of tiddlers as a static file is pretty much 1 or 2 clicks and bang, the file gets downloaded. The problem comes if you want to create static renderings of 200 tiddlers, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And of course, the end result gives you a static website that performs very well on mobile, for instance. But the trouble is that within when we're operating purely within the browser, there's no, well, I'll say there's no practical way of downloading hundreds of files. Browsers try to stop you because they think you must be evil if you're trying to download lots of files on the user. Yes, anyway, so it doesn't work. But using JSZip, what we ought to be able to do is to have a facility to access tiddlers in a particular format, rendered through a particular template, as a zip file. The processing will still take quite a while, and so we need to make sure that it's cancelable. But the end result will be pretty useful and get quite close to a blogging engine, for instance, that you could use entirely locally, just pushing static files up to Dropbox or what have you. Any questions, thoughts?
How is the zip file compression going to help with blogs, practically speaking?
Oh, for people who want to create blogs with TiddlyWiki that want their blog to be static, they then have the problem of working on the TiddlyWiki, either under Node.js or in the browser, and then wanting to press a publish button, so to speak. Yeah. And so obviously that's perfectly doable right now under Node.js. But it's in the browser that JSZip would help. Which sounds really weird. Why would you help people, blogging entirely in the browser? But of course, we've found, I think, that our efforts to support operations in the browser that you wouldn't normally think could be done in the browser have been really interesting and entertaining, but have also ended up kind of pushing and shaping.
Just trying to understand the workflow there. Would it be that the user or the author in this case is downloading the zip file and then uploading it to some platform that just knows how to unpack this into whatever the requirement is? Or
the easiest way I could imagine somebody doing that would be to throw the zip file, unzip the zip file into Dropbox. Yeah. Would be reasonable to do, and obviously with the provisos about there's only some situations where Dropbox will let you host HTML files. Throwing them at GitHub, I guess, as well. But whenever we talk about the browser-based workflows, they're always self-evidently much less convenient and speedy than the equivalent thing under Node.js. Hence, to begin with, in TiddlyWiki's life, I only even thought about the process for writing plugins when one was running under Node.js. And although I knew that I eventually would like to be able to build plugins in the browser, I was really surprised that there was so much demand early on from people who wanted to build plugins in the browser. It seems, if it's kind of, I guess, if you've got all the facilities of Node.js available to you, then it can seem almost perverse, really, to try and do these complicated operations in the browser. But as I say, there's been a proven demand for it, and I've quite enjoyed trying to meet that demand.
One more question. I can imagine the process of exporting a zip file, sure, from a wiki, so which contains whatever content I wanted using the template that I wanted to use. I understand that part. So now I'm putting that on Dropbox. I mean, the idea probably is not to have a zip file available in Dropbox, but for something to be done with it.
You'd unzip the file.
Okay, so you would operate in the.
The zip file isn't at all useful except to get you into the browser. So literally all it's buying you is the ability to download lots of files in one go. And in fact, the fact that the zip file is compressed is not even interesting. So I did waste a bit of time a few months ago just looking at how simple the zip file format was to see if I could easily write code that would concatenate files together as a valid zip file, but without any compression, and therefore, with much shorter code. But I came to the conclusion that JS zip is there for a reason. Plus, it's, I mean, in fact, of course, being able to read zip files is pretty interesting too. I think for certain bulk upload operations, maybe. I don't know. I mean, yeah, if I say a scenario like wanting to upload a whole load of images and some metadata in a spreadsheet, I don't know, that kind of thing feels a bit easier to kind of conceptually to think about that as zip everything up that you need and then upload it. But anyway, one of the reasons why I mentioned it was that it's come up before that I think really quite recently with Felix, that should we take this approach of making reusable libraries into their own plugins so that they can be shared with multiple plugins? And my attitude remains that I'm a bit concerned, because I worry that for end users there is a configuration nightmare of making sure that they've got the right plugins there. And that's true almost regardless of what we do to try and make it easy. Even if we automatically install the dependent plugins, they could still have deleted it or what have you. So there's sort of complexity there. And a bigger concern that I mentioned before is about sharing two plugins, both using async. They might not necessarily be compatible with the same version of async. And so, although it sounds ridiculous and inefficient, I have thought in the past that maybe it actually makes more sense to accept that it involves some duplication, but that basically to expect each plugin to pack their own copy of the library. And particularly for those libraries that proudly advertise themselves as, now that libraries are small, proudly advertise themselves as being 28 kilobytes and stuff, that, doesn't seem as mad as it once did. So, Eric, are you still awake, Eric? I'm hoping that Eric is there.
Yeah, pretty well faded.
I'm sorry that we've messed up the timing. But if I can spur you into action, Eric, I would really like you to show how you. Oh no, you said that you can't show it.
Yeah, I can't screen share on the tablet.
Yes, you can screen share. So, Eric.
I'll work that out for next time.
Yes, of course, because you'll be on your new laptop. So for Eric, for some time now, for a year, I guess, has been involved in writing inside TiddlyWiki, and which is the ultimate guide to TiddlyWiki. And I'm guessing, I think if we drew a Venn diagram, a pie chart of effort, then there's been some amount of effort on the book and some opposite amount of effort on creating a fantastic framework within TiddlyWiki for creating and publishing books. And Eric has shown it to us on the Hangouts, I think, probably a few times over the last few months. And it's actually dazzling because it's kind of hard to separate one's reaction to the book itself, to the content, and it remains a careful sort of distillation of everything you need to know about TiddlyWiki in a form that's easy to learn. It's designed to be read in sequence. And then all these amazing features that Eric's implemented for the interface itself. And in many cases, they satisfy some deep demands within the TiddlyWiki community.
What I can give you is sort of just a sort of get some echo there. Oops.
Yep, go for it. And I'll turn my...
Yeah. Basically, I started from the approach of using the table of contents macro, which just uses tagging to create a hierarchy. And then, of course, it's just, in the default table of contents macro, it just gives you the hierarchy. And so I started with that. So I use the same exact data representation of tiddlers being tagged to create a hierarchy, but I simply have other macros to walk that hierarchy and do interesting things with it. And so that means that people can take their hierarchical outline they've been developing with vanilla TiddlyWiki and just drop all their content into one of my enhanced book containers, and it should automatically just show up and work.
Oh, sorry, Eric, I was on mute, avoiding the echo. Great. Well, I hope you'll be able to join us. I'm not sure when the next Hangout will be. Actually, I guess in the new year. But hopefully, then you'll be able to show everybody how far you've got. I also wanted to ask about the book itself. What progress?
Well, this is the odd thing that
yes,
this is the odd thing that you've pointed out. How there's been other folks in the past who have set off to do sort of great tomes of technical writing, and have gotten diverted into the actual tools for writing. What I'm finding is that it is a lot more difficult to explain the basic ideas. We all understand TiddlyWiki here. We've been through it. We talk it through. We get examples. But to try to explain in simple and understandable terms what it's all about, and building it up from the starting point to get to the point where people can say, oh, now I can use this. It's surprisingly easier to do things like explain macro syntax or discuss recursion or something than it is to explain the basic steps of what's on the screen and how to understand what it is. Once this particular effort, however, has achieved its goal, the end result is that not only will I have the sort of startup, sort of beginner's guide to TiddlyWiki material, but I also have a framework in which to create additional materials, this book framework. And what I found is that part of the difficulty in creating content was that I would alternate between the content and the structure. And that now that I have something which sort of more or less automates all of that sort of structural aspects, that now it's much more fluid to actually create content, because I have places to put it where I don't have to stop and go, oh, now I need to make a drop down and a menu and a thing to put something here. I have those mechanisms available so I don't have to focus on that. I can focus on the actual content.
Well, let's hope. It's a challenge that so many of us struggle with. So we've got about half an hour. Nathan, are you microphoned? And plus, I didn't actually give you a chance to introduce yourself.
I think I have a microphone working.
You do. Hello, Nathan. Would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Nathan Kane. I'm a developer from the United States, working with TiddlyWiki for, going on, I think, 2 years now with TiddlyWiki 5, and playing around with various developments. Lately I've been, finding lots of reasons why Tiddly Desktop is no good, basically. And I have started... Yes, I have started looking at Electron a little bit, and sort of what it would take to get up and running with the Tiddly Desktop alternative under Electron. It does not seem to have the same sorts of issues and concerns that I have with NWJS. So I'm quite interested in exploring that further.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm still. I think I can't remember if you were on the Hangout when we were discussing it, but my laborious processing is that I no longer wish to pursue Tiddly Desktop as a custom browser. I now want to pursue it as a user interface to the Node.js version of TiddlyWiki, serving serving over HTTP to the user's ordinary browser. And for me personally, to make that really, really cool, what I want is a system tray icon. So for me, that's at the top right, but for some people, it would be at the bottom right, that I can get a list of my wikis, click on it, instantly start it if it's not started, open my default browser on that wiki. And I think with only a few more, there's a few fixes to the client-server world that I would like to do anyway. But I think we could easily get to the point where it wouldn't matter if one opened the same wiki in more than one window. And that I think is the main risk with the approach I described. That just depending on how you work, you can end up with 3 Gmail tabs open, as you zip around. And as ever, I'm interested in the Tiddly Desktop features that we've never really done. Things like a global keyboard shortcut that brings up a window where I can write some stuff and that it is saved even before I decide where I want to save it, which wiki I want to save it to and as what tiddler. So that there's a kind of global draft thing going on, because I find that I type things, that I type things into basically a throwaway notepad on my desktop and then copy them into TiddlyWiki at the end of the phone call or the meeting or whatever I've been making notes through. And I'd kind of like that to all be native. And to the point about NWJS versus Electron, it's really clear that Electron is also, well, from what I can tell, I think I got more control for running multiple Node.js versions under Electron, because you may have seen that there's quite a nice inter-process communication model, which is completely lacking in NWJS. So in NWJS, if you spawn an extra process, you're supposed to talk to it via a pretty low-level socket interface, worry about ports and all that kind of thing. Whereas in Electron, it's way nicer.
And that's really sort of the, I mentioned I had sort of several security concerns about NWJS, and they really all come down to that sort of fundamental point, is that it really is, it's entirely single process. And so once you escape your sandbox, so to speak, you're able to access all of the application and do anything with the process. So that's really sort of the fundamental concern with TWJS that Electron doesn't share.
It's just that everything is switching over as well. The new WordPress desktop app is Electron too. Kind of a shame, but I guess very often the person who comes second is in a better position to win. I don't know.
It's too true.
Slightly distressing thought, given that I've always been brought up to value being first. Well, we all have, haven't we? Yeah. So, but remind me, why are you looking at Tiddly Desktop? I can't remember that.
Well, I'm looking at well, kind of a combination of reasons. Just sort of in general, for secure application development, I have this sort of notion of well, a Tiddly desktop that goes beyond just managing TiddlyWikis and is actually sort of a general purpose desktop interface. And sort of employing, this goes back to the old notion of Tiddly operating system, where the Tiddly kernel could become sort of the root, sort of an init process style entity for managing all of your system usage, for managing all of your interaction with your computer. So that's sort of the big picture end goal. But generally, just application development and in general, and decided that it was not suitable for that because largely because of a variety of issues that stem from that single process model.
Yeah, interesting. The talking about TiddlyWiki as an operating system, have we talked about my fantasy of doing a bare metal TiddlyWiki?
Yes, that's something that I think one of our very first discussions when we started throwing these concepts around. Yes, and that's sort of included in where I'd like to go with this is eventually I have this vision of a single statically compiled TiddlyWiki instance, managing a set of more dynamic TiddlyWiki instances, and using that as sort of the processing and application model for your operating system. That is sort of my part of my big picture end goal of this is to have a very, very thin Linux desktop stack. Basically just the kernel and some standard Linux file system hierarchy and some standard Linux tools, something like a Wayland compositor or a very light graphical stack, and then just TiddlyWiki and TiddlyWiki components on top of that. So it is conceptually it is or would be a traditional Linux environment, but with a very non-traditional Linux user interface.
I think you're looking at two sides of the same coin. One of the reasons why I'm interested in doing a bare metal, so the bare metal version I'm interested in is on the server, and so it would talk to clients via HTTP. And the reason why I'm interested in doing it bare metal is because I've long had the belief that Linux et al. Are very ill-suited to server applications because they're essentially workstation operating systems that we've adapted to the purpose, and right down to their multi-threading model. They're designed to support illusions that are important for interactive users and contain many features that are positively unhelpful for the kinds of things that we're trying to do. So I think, but of course, from the angle from where you're starting, of course, you don't have the luxury of throwing out the stack because the point we've also actually discussed on a recent Hangout that your end, the client end of a purpose-built TiddlyWiki is, I think, between 10 and 100 times more complicated than the server end. The transmitter being simpler than the receiver point that we were discussing. But then of course they would work beautifully together. What one would like to see is your very lightweight Linux server booting over the network from this bare metal server, because there's no reason why some of the tiddlers on there couldn't be bootable container images. I don't know, whatever the latest way of packing binary files together is. Matt, hello. Sorry, bad timing. Nathan, you were about to say something, and then Matt, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sort of, one of the I guess sort of driving use cases of what I'm trying to do is to be able to do development of a web application, client and server components, locally within a TiddlyWiki, and then be able to push that out to a server and really more to the point, do lifecycle management on that server or application, across a server farm or across a multi-server farm cloud, from that desktop environment, sort of as if it was a local entity, and to sort of transparently smooth away those differences behind the notion of what is the server and the notion of what is the desktop.
So there's a technique that I really love that I'm barely using at the moment, which is how fun it is to write traditional Node.js code that just reaches to the DOM when it wants to provide a UI. Particularly because if you want to provide any kind of dynamic feedback of processing in a Node.js system, you're kind of setting up WebSockets and all this awful gubbins to stream stuff back to the browser. So I've always thought that NW.js and now Electron are really interesting for a class of what's the opposite of a headless app, a server app that needs a head, even if you only need the head sometimes when you're debugging it or installing it or understanding it. So as you're imagining a Node.js, an app that you could run, well, say it's an Electron app that you can run headless, and of course that means roughly it goes back to being Node.js, except of course we can still get at canvas and all that thing because we've still got access to the DOM. It's kind of better than a naked Node.js environment would be.
And one thing sort of related to that I've always been very interested in is the notion of shared DOMs. Meaning, and this goes back to one of the very first experiments I ever did with Node.js. The idea of keeping the DOM tree itself and the DOM state on a central server, and then multiple users with local mirrors of that DOM live in their browser that all stay synced between each other. So sort of a collaborative browser session or collaborative DOM session. I think that for web development, for team web development, I think would be an ideal that we've never really gotten to yet as things stand today.
Indeed. Matt's just typed into the sidebar that I hadn't noticed, but that there's a whole load of questions in the Q&A section. So I do want to make sure that we touch on those. Nathan, we should. One of the things that I've been finding really enjoyable about this endeavor, the bare metal TiddlyWiki, is that I know that I can't even remotely justify writing code for it at the moment, and so all my the very enjoyable thinking and time I'm putting into it is all just typing, just writing pseudocode and thinking about it and so on. And I've really quite enjoyed that because one of the great things when you're not writing code is that you don't have to refactor it. So one can make one can explore fundamental changes in the architecture at a point that's never been cheaper. But maybe we should figure out some more direct ways to collaborate. Well, maybe if we do switch Tiddly Desktop over to Electron, maybe we can converge on that and do some stuff there. Right, so let me answer some of the questions that Matt has put into the Q&A thing. So what happens, Matt, is when I accept a question, which I've just done, then I am told, and I've never checked, that subsequently when people are watching the video, they can see the question flash up. So that's something that we really should check, but that's what the docs say it does. So Matt's first question, here's a way to get automatic transcriptions for Hangouts. And Oh, what is the way? I can't see the link there, Matt.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, since I'm here, I might just as well pose my own questions.
Yeah.
So, hey guys. Okay, very briefly for anyone watching this recording, I'm Matthias from Stockholm, Sweden. I'm a long-time participant in the community. So I'm not going to stay though, because I'm really busy with other things. But I've been listening to you guys in the background, and it's a lot of fantastic stuff coming up. Really happy for that. Thank you, Jed, Tobias, Jeremy. Wait, what happened to Eric, by the way? I have a question for him. He fell
Eric
asleep,
dropped
I guess.
off, but
anyway, so my first question was not really a question, and it was something I posted, I think, before the Hangout started today, but it was just a mention that I found a way to generate automatic transcriptions for Hangouts.
Is that from within YouTube?
Yes,
Yeah.
YouTube or yeah. I think when they're recorded. Maybe I can find the link again. Anyway, so my little challenge there was if anyone was up for it to kind of make searchable text for searchable transcriptions for the Hangouts in completion or in addition to Mario's notations to the Hangouts. Just a thought, just an interesting idea. I thought.
Well, it is quite interesting.
But my other question.
And before,
sorry, I didn't get that.
Before turning away from that, something that I've seen colleagues do is also to use specialist dictation software to get transcripts. So I think it's called Dragon Dictate or Nuance or something. There's some app that, I mean, I don't use it, but quite a lot of people do. And so I've seen people just feed their recordings into that. But yes, it must need some kind of manual correction process, mustn't it? As well, I mean, as well as the automated speech recognition. But Matt, carry on. You were going to go on to a second point, I think. Hi, you can everybody hear me? Ah, how weird. Everybody else is frozen.
I think we just lost Matt.
We've lost Matt.
Yeah, it's just Matt.
Yes, that's one of those comedy things when people say we've lost Matt, and then everybody fears the worst. But hopefully not in that sense, Matt. I hope you're okay out there. Just looking through the questions, actually, I think the other questions are comments. And one of them is that there's a nice background on the agenda today. So this is something that I'm not sure that it's ever really been worth the effort, but for a while I've been trying to create a wiki for each Hangout. Today's Hangout features the beautiful Sea of St. Leonard's in Kent or Sussex, I'm not sure, but anyway, in England. But although I tap in the links and agenda, I do wonder how useful it is to do that. But anyway, I end up having quite fun picking a background, so I guess it's not a totally useless process. I need to go fairly short at 6, so let's move towards finishing up with any other comments or thoughts from anybody. Matt, if you're still watching on the other side, do post your next question if you have one, by the way. But any comments or thoughts, Jed, Nathan, Tobias? Oh, Matt's back. Jed, do continue.
I was just going to say that somebody, Steve, earlier, right before he went off, said that he was interested in using the SVG things for his students. and I don't think I got a chance to say before he left that if somebody has a specific use like that, that they have a request for what would make it better, feel free to ask. So I guess nobody here probably has one, but just people watching.
And we've all seen how the one thing that Jed needs is more programming tasks to preoccupy him, especially probably as we approach Christmas. It was noticeable that Steve, the comment to Steve that Jed is referring to, Steve says, I'll introduce this to some animation students, if any show up in my class. So I thought that was quite interesting. So I guess animation students, presumably, these days still mostly learn, drawing and stuff. And so interesting that he saw this more mechanical, procedural way of creating animations to be of interest to them. The bit that they might be interested in is, how different it is from the conventional means they're using to create animations. But Steve follows up with saying two things, actually. Sorry, glad to have a video demo to share with the students. So that's the same point, I guess, as Felix and I have learned and repeated to everybody else, which is that it's great to do screencasts. I find that it's very difficult to keep a screencast up to date, but there's no question, especially for this kind of new stuff, Tobias, that a screencast would be awesome. And obviously you can link to the Hangouts. It might be worth linking on your demos to the Hangout demos that you've done, but I do wonder whether a special 2 or 3 minute screencast, just an overview, would be a very useful thing. Then the other thing Steve says is, call that Tiddly Prezi. So I'd forgotten, but Steve is one of the many people who's believes, like me, that there is a product that's better than Prezi, and I think all of us think Prezi is quite a cool product, somewhere buried inside TiddlyWiki for using TiddlyWiki for those kinds of, what's the word, graphical presentations. Yes. So, any other thoughts or comments before we close? Excellent. Well, as you guys, thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciate you making the effort. Actually, there was a couple of admin things. The first thing is, won't be another Hangout next week, so I guess it'll be 2 weeks. Then I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks in January, so we probably won't be back to regular Hangouts for, I don't know, end of January, February, possibly. But I'll try and fit in as many as I can when I am around. The other thing is that I'm still much preoccupied with the need to get TiddlyWiki 5.1.10 out of the door. I really, at the moment, it's so long, I'm so behind on the tickets and everything that I don't even feel that I have a good sense for how ready it is to release. But that's something I hope to look at over the next 24 hours. And it sounds bonkers, but if I can, I'd like to try and get it out before the Christmas holiday kicks off, because I know, maybe that's, I may be missing something, but I'm not actually aware of anything big that that remains to be done. But part of the reason for mentioning it is if you know of any showstoppers, so anything about releasing 5.1.10 in its present form that you think would be a mistake or worrying, this is a great time to say so. And obviously it's the easiest, safest option is always to not release, to be cautious about controversial features, but much appreciate any feedback that you may have on that stuff. Particularly thinking about you, Tobias, because I know that you've been involved probably in all the pull requests that I'm failing to make progress through. And what I'm kind of saying is this isn't a good time for risky stuff. No. But it would be if there's anything that needs to be pulled back. So if there's any particularly worried about anything that we put into 5.1.10 that we might need to pull back hasn't been successful, that would be good to know.
There's some broken edit template that I made a pull request for. So I don't know. Maybe if you can just check the headline if it says fixes something. So
yeah,
maybe
I'll do
that, right?
I'll do a quick walkthrough. But anything that suddenly occurs to you, if you get a chance to bounce a comment to the top of my inbox, that would be great.
Okay.
So on that happy note, guys, thank you very much to everybody for joining me today, and thank you everybody else for watching. For those of you celebrating this week, happy celebrations, and for everybody else, have a happy week too. And I shall look forward to seeing everybody, well, as soon as we can arrange the next hangout. But guys, we'll wave goodbye in the usual way while I terminate the broadcast. Many thanks. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.